Good morning everyone! Have you ever wondered what camera settings to use for street photography and everyday photography? Well, I'm gonna share with you in this video step by step every settings that I set up, why I set them up, and how they can help you not only in the field but also save time after when you're processing your images. I've spent years dialing those in, so if you're ready, grab your camera or pen and paper and let's get right into it. Welcome! I just hosted a photography workshop in New York City and camera settings came up a lot with different techniques, so I thought I would give you the latest and updated version of my setup for camera settings because a lot can go on and I keep tweaking things over the years to be faster and more efficient with them. If you don't know me, my name is PMT Lambert. I'm a travel photographer, the creator of the 30-day to great photos, a step-by-step method for taking your photography to the next level. Try it out, there's a link in the description, and on this YouTube channel I'm sharing tutorials and photography adventures, so leave it a big thumbs up if you like it and subscribe to see the next one. Let's start right away with number one, the biggest topic, autofocus. Autofocus is one of the biggest stepping stones for your camera settings. Why? Because it will determine if your subject is sharp or not. And to nail your focus, there's a lot of ways to do them, but in 99% of cases, I am actually shooting in what we call autofocus continuous, AFC. That setting is on my Sony cameras, but will be on all the other cameras. So if you're using a Nikon or Canon, maybe the names will change a little bit, but they will be the same. So AFC means that your focus is done continuously. If you have a subject moving towards you, the focus will be done while the subject moves towards you in order to always have that subject in focus sharp. Now, here's a little caveat with this is that if you're shooting in AFC, the hack is to use BBF, back button focus. Why? Because let me explain to you what the contrary of AFC is. It's AFS. AF as in autofocus, single. So in AFS, and whenever you get a camera, it's always set up like this. Your shutter button, when you half press it, it engages the autofocus system. Your subject could move towards you or move away from you, the autofocus will not change, which can be good, but it's also a big drawback if your subject is moving and you want to keep focusing, right? So how do we get the benefit of using AFS? Because it allows you actually to lock that focus in a position and then recompose, do what we call focus recompose. It's extremely helpful, especially when you have subject in corners or at bottom of frames. What you do is you use that AFC with back button focus. That means you disable the autofocus with your shutter button. Okay, so you cannot autofocus with your shutter button anymore, but you set it to the back button focus, the AF on button or whatever button you want to call it. As long as you're pressing this button, you're engaged in AFC, so continuous autofocus, but the moment you release it, your autofocus stays where it was, okay? So it's like AFS if you don't press anything. And now you can press in full freedom in that shutter button because it's not gonna refocus anything, okay? So that's great, it just engages the shutter, clack, clack. We're taking a photo or we're not taking a photo. I have a full breakdown video of that BBF, but I don't want to go too much into details. You can watch it later. Right now, we need to talk about the 1% where I'm not using that mode. And for that, it's going to be in manual focus mode or DMF also, which DMF allows you to basically shoot with autofocus, but every time you engage that ring, it's gonna move to manual focus. Why is manual focus helpful? Because in some circumstances, like the other day when I was doing portraits with neon lights, well, the autofocus had a really hard time finding the face. It was so dark, and also we were shooting at f1.2, so I just went to manual on the lens or on my camera, and luckily I had a little bit of zooming in going on, so I could just nail the focus on the eyes and then take my shot. Could also be helpful when you're actually trying to set up a very specific frame geometrically perfect and you want someone to walk into that frame like I was doing in New York City in the streets by Wall Street. I was like trying to keep a very specific frame and I wanted the people to walk while they were gonna go into the shadow. I just pre-focus on the point where I wanted them to be. With my AF on button at the back, I pressed once, then I released, and then I waited, and when they passed, boom, I just pressed my shutter. And that was it. That's how I nailed it basically on the field. So that's for the autofocus mode. Now, what about the autofocus zones? Which areas are we using? You have so many options, but personally, I use, again, in 97% of cases, maybe 95%, I'm gonna be in what we call spot tracking. Why spot tracking? Because spot tracking allows me to be extremely precise on where my focus point will be, and once I press on it, it's gonna lock on that subject and it's gonna follow it through the frame. Extremely helpful. There's also the spot S, which is also helpful, but it's not going to track a subject. My rule of thumb is to always know exactly where your focus point will be, unless you land in the category of the few times I need to shoot in wide area. So the wide area will basically let the camera decide where to focus. Wow. And that sounds a little wild when you think about it. Why? Because you're going to leave it to the camera to decide where your subject is going to be. In 95% of cases, I don't want to do that. I actually want to tell the camera where my focus is. I want to tell the camera this is on that person or on that tree, on that leaf, and not the one behind and not the one on the left or on the right. Okay, so be extremely intentional in all your photos. And that's how I achieve that with the autofocus. But in wide mode, why is it helpful? Because sometimes I'm gonna have people walking in the frame last minute, or I'm shooting blind from the hip, or I'm shooting blind behind, or I'm doing different techniques that actually don't allow me to see where my autofocus will be. So I just go in wide mode and hope for the best while pressing on it and pressing on the shutter. So while we're still on the topic of autofocus, do I detect subjects or not? All cameras recently have been really good at detecting subjects. You can set it to detect trains, planes, people, insects, flying stuff, etc. Extremely helpful, yes, but not always. For example, if I wanted to detect subjects, I'm gonna try to be precise if I want humans or if I want cars or if I want animals. Why? Because again, if I'm doing street photography, I don't want to just focus on anything that's passing by. So the subject detection can be helpful, and I have a little hack for you for that in just a second. But at the same time, I'm just gonna leave it that the priority is my spot focus, and I don't want any subject. And that's important when you set your AF on. You want to set it to the AF on and not AF on with subject detection, because then it can get a little tricky. And every camera does that differently, but on the Sony one, it's just called AF on. So that's what I'm going for. And for tracking subjects, it will recognize that subject if it's within my little spot. In my AF area selected, if the subject, for example, a human is present, it will lock in on that human on the eyes. And so I turn eye detection on. If it's outside of my autofocus area, it's not gonna go as a priority on it, which is very important. If you ever get confused why your photos are honestly blurry and just focus on other things, check those settings. It happens a lot that they are set up like this. Now, what if I want to be extra quick and I'm in spot focus, but the spot is on the side? Very simply, I'm gonna press on my lens, on the little button when I'm using my Sony lenses, and I have this button mapped out to something called IAS. And IAF allows me to know no matter where my autofocus area is, no matter what it is, when I press this button, it's gonna look for eyes anywhere in the frame. And that's kind of an override of any other settings that exist. Okay, that is a big topic, autofocus. If you still have questions around the autofocus, let me know in the comments below. But now we're gonna move on to the second part, which is which camera mode am I using? We have M, S, A, and P. So I'm gonna be 85% of the time in aperture priority, 5% of the time in shutter speed priority, and 10% of the time in manual mode. Why each of those? Aperture priority will allow me to control my depth of field, which is a very important creative direction in the act of taking a photo. How much in focus do I want to be in my image? I want to be able to set that very easily. And that's kind of my most important creative choice I make when I'm taking photos, is going to be that depth of field in the image. So hip shots, blind shots, things I can't really see, apertures above f8, f5.6 in order to really nail it, and anything Other than that, it's going to be just a creative choice because I can afford shooting wide open at 1.2, 1.8, 2.8, or actually going to f8. And again, this lowers my aperture, the less context I'm gonna have, and the higher my aperture, the more context I'm gonna have in that shot. So remember, it's a question of how much storytelling, how much context you need in each of those images. So aperture priority will allow me to just control my aperture and let the two other parameters that are important in our exposure triangle, which are the shutter speed and the ISO, completely automatic. Now you can put a little bit of range, which I do with the minimum shutter speed. That setting is a lifesaver because it allows to tell the camera, hey, I don't want you to shoot under 1/250 of the second, 1/25th, 150, 1/1000s, and that way again you're controlling just your aperture and the camera does the rest. The ISO, same, you can set a higher and lower limit in order to have too much noise. That's really my most efficient setup. And while we're talking about shutter speed, let's talk about those 5% of the time when I'm using shutter speed priority. Shutter speed has a great advantage. It's also give you a lot of creative freedom, whether you want motion blur in your images or not. Do you want rays of light? Do you want subjects to look like they're in motion through the streets? Or do you want them to be completely tuck sharp? If I'm trying to do panning shots, I actually will go to shutter speed priority and drop that shutter speed to 1/5 of a second. And I don't care about what the aperture does. I don't care about what the ISO does. Why? Because I'm going for the creative look of doing a panning shot. When you're tracking a subject like this and you're taking a photo while it's passing by. And in order to have a cool effect, well, you want to drag your shutter speed to 1/5 of a second or 1/15 or 1/25. It's an effect I absolutely love to do. Now we're getting to manual mode. I use manual mode about 10% of the time because I can get away with honestly my aperture priority mode most of the time. The big hack for me is to shoot in manual, so set my aperture and set my shutter speed manually, but leave the ISO in auto. And when I leave the ISO in auto, the camera will do its thing. I can set a higher and lower limit if I want to, but honestly, with most modern cameras I'm using, I'm totally fine shooting at ISO 32,000 unless I need extreme sharpness. And this is also very helpful. Let's say if I camped in a very specific area or if I was shooting contrasted scenes, I would use full manual in order to get that very contrasted dark shadows look. But there's also another method that relies on the metering mode. And let's talk about it right now. This is number 3, metering modes. I have a full length video on metering modes and how they work, but what I use right now is metering mode multi, which is the first one. It's a default one. It's the most versatile, let's say, of all the metering modes. There's a bunch of others like spot metering, center, entire screen, but I use that metering mode multi all the time. Okay, it's on 99.9% of the time. Honestly, I don't really use the other ones, because I realized that when I edit my photos, and whether it's with presets or fully manual on Lightroom or any other software, I actually can recover what I want to recover when I'm shooting in multi, which is great. So if I want to go for a full contrast look, I can. And if I want to come more to a HDR or bring out a lot of shadows, that's still possible. Now I have a little hack in circumstances where it's very difficult to get the right exposure that is beyond using that exposure compensation. Just so you know, the exposure compensation, I use it a lot. So it's the -1, +1, -3 of exposure. You telling the camera basically, please underexpose by 3 stops, underexpose by 1 stop or over compared to what you're actually building in right now. So if you're using manual, full manual, that is absolutely useless. But if you're using any mode that has any parameter that is in auto, let's say manual with ISO auto or shutter speed priority or aperture priority, then that exposure compensation is going to be extremely quick and helpful to get the scene exposed the way you want it. Okay, so you can be like, hey, wait, too dark or too bright. Just like go up a little bit to the camera. But you can go even faster with the AEL button that you can set up on any button of your camera, which will allow you to quickly measure the light somewhere and then apply those parameters that the camera set up and any other recomposition. By default, it's in hold mode, which means you need to hold that button to measure the light and then hold it in order to keep those parameters. But if you're doing back button focus, that means you need to be able to press on 2 buttons with 1 thumb at the same time. It's absolutely horrendous. It's much easier to go and toggle AEL. It's going to toggle on and off the metering in that very specific zone that you set up. It's called AEL toggle with the little square and the little point in the center. One of you suggested, and I've been using it since, in the comments, to use the AEL with spot metering, which is great. Honestly, thank you so much for sharing that. I cannot thank enough this community for dropping really good insight in the comments. Now, setting number 4 is going to be my image quality. And for that, yes, I'm shooting everything in RAW. So I'm going to be shooting in RAW compressed in order to save a little bit of space, honestly. And I'm not going to shoot in JPEG at all, especially because if I'm transferring photos to my phone, I can set it to send me a JPEG version of it. So I don't want to do anything for that. I'm also not adding any creative styles in there or profile pictures unless I'm doing video. Little note, if you don't like the photos at the back of your camera, and that happened to one of the participants in the workshop, we literally went to his creative styles and added contrast to his standard profile. And then he was much happier looking at the back of his screen, thinking it looked a lot more like what he wanted to come out of the camera at the end. So that's a little hack, but personally I don't change it much. Maybe I'll add a little bit of contrast, but that's basically it, because again, I'm working from RAWs, then I just apply my Lightroom presets, do a few tweaks, and that's it. And whether it's on my phone or on my computer, I do the same. So it really doesn't matter for me, which brings us to another thing that doesn't matter, which is number 5. Setting number 5, white balance. Should you set it or not? If you're shooting in RAW like me, I'm shooting in RAW, I do not care about the white balance. For all I care, it could be in tungsten when I'm shooting photos, and I would still be able to get the perfect white balance after, because when you shoot in RAW, the white balance is not set in stone. You can change it after, okay? If you shoot in JPEG, that white balance is set in stone. So you want to be extremely cautious and use the right white balance for your scene. But I will say that nowadays, most cameras do another white balance that is pretty good. Now, sometimes I end up with something too cool or too warm, especially around sunset and sunrise. I like to have a little warmer tones. So I will change the white balance just for me to have a feedback on the camera that I prefer visually to look at. Honestly, don't overthink the white balance. If you're editing your photos in RAW, auto white balance will probably be best. That's how I set it. Auto white balance 99.9% of the time. Sunset, sunrise, I may turn to cloudy or shade, depending on how warm it is or not. Number 6 is going to be drive mode, and that will impact how many photos I'm gonna end up with at the end of a session. So what I want to do is keep a drive mode for single shot as much as I can, unless I have to do burst. Why? Because if I'm shooting with the A1, I can end up with a lot of photos. Even if I shoot with this one, do I need 3 photos of the same scene? Not always. I do like, especially in street photography, to be very intentional and kind of wait for the subject to come at the right place to click. Now, if it's critical or if there's a lot of things moving, I actually will move to burst mode in order to get a burst of photos and hopefully have the right position of the legs for that person in the shot. So for example, if you have a person with the 2 legs stacking on each other, the dynamism in the image is not as strong as if, for example, they're creating a triangle. Now, number 7, I will add it, is a crop mode. So APS-C 35 mode. I have it set up at the back of my camera as a shortcut in order to really crop in quickly in a frame. Very helpful in street photography, especially if I'm on a prime and I want to go from 35 to about 50. I just press on this and click, I'm there, and it allows me to reframe and work with a different frame, and as if I had a different lens, right? It's not perfect, but it's a little hack that I use all the time. And that brings us to a last important setting that saves me so much time when I get home. It is to set up a custom button for reviewing and rating images. So whenever I'm on street session and I have a downtime on the train or transport and I'm not taking photos, I'm literally gonna go and review all the photos and rate them with one of my little buttons. You can go in your settings and change that in order to say 1 star, 2 star, 3 star. Every time I press on one, it's gonna cycle from 0 star to 5 star. And the beauty is that once I go to my laptop, all those photos with a rating are going to be there in outside my computer rated already. So I can just select those that I like and import these into Lightroom and scrap the rest. It really changed the speed at which I'm able to review photos, especially in the past, I would say, year or year and a half since I've been using it. It's been incredible. I could come out of a street session with having all my images called just on the way back to my home. I find that the shorter the time can be between when I take a photo and when I get it out, the better it is. So try that setting and try to set it for you so that it works, so that it shortens your cycle of photography. We're covering a lot, but to help you, I have a little cheat sheet in the description with my most used camera settings depending on different situations and some tips. Grab it, it's free, the link is in the description. Now, if you want to see me on the field shoot, watch this video, or if you want to go deeper in any of the topics I mentioned, watch this one. And with that being said, get out there, go shoot, try something different, try something new. I'll see you in the next one.